What's up, everyone, and welcome to our Section 1AA football team previews, where we'll be giving an overview of all the teams in this league and kind of our overlook on how the league is going to be going, or the Section 1AA will be going. And I'm your host, Frank Langella, joined by my co-host, Marcelio Langella. We're doing our team previews once again. Mars, welcome to the show.
Man, it is wild to be back. It was a fast summer, and all I could say is that it's weird seeing that the section or the game's starting later than normal. We're only in that week 0, and normally at Labor Day weekend after that first day of school, we're usually hitting week 1, but that's not what the case this year. So we're in a weird ground right now. So it's definitely a weird feeling.
Yeah, we're in week 0, and I want to thank the crowd for tuning in. Again, this is our team previews. We're going to be going to a slight overview of each team. Obviously, for time purposes, can't do a deep dive, but we're going to dive into each team, what we learned over the summer, what we learned watching tape, how the season could go, and some players to keep an eye on. So again, we won't talk about all of them. That doesn't mean we don't think that there are good players if I don't mention you, but again, we're going to be talking about some of those things. Let's start off with the league itself, Mars. And again, when you look at Section 1AA, the big news coming into this league this year is the East Ramapo merger. So the Ramapo High School and Spring Valley have merged together to form one team. We've seen this previously with the Yonkers team. So again, now we have an East Ramapo merger, and they're going to be in one of the leagues. And this league is being broken up into 2 separate ones, right? You have this, what people are calling this Power League, or I call League A, but they call it a Power League of 8 teams. And it's like all the big boys lumped up together into one. And then in League B, they have 7 teams. And in that Power League, they're taking 6 teams in the playoffs for that one, 2 from the other league. So with that being said, I do want to, what I think has been a great thing that Section 1's added is kind of this media day thing. This is like the 2nd year. And they run a poll there for each one. They do a coach's poll and a player's poll on who they think is going to win the section title. Now, I do think there's a little caveat. They are allowed to vote for themselves, which I think is a little bit unfair. I hope LOA changes that in the future. But with that said, you could see on the coaches poll and players poll, the top teams that everyone thinks is going to win the section. So you could see number 1 and 2 are the same on both Carmel and Arlington. And then things start to mix up after that. So that's really interesting there. I wanted to point it out. But Mars, let's dive into the teams. And I'm going to go over a couple teams, and then I'll let you kind of comment on something that you found to be important, or one of the teams you want to discuss. First things up is Arlington, right? They went 10-1. They lost to Carmel in the Section 1AA final last season. Last 3 years, they were 23-9. They've won a lot of football games. In the last 5 years, 33-15. So the season, they were the favorite last year. Obviously ended in disappointment. They're probably the favorite in the section title game. We all know what happened there, right? So that's going to be the big thing. But you look at the kids coming back this year, Mars, offensively, they're returning 8 starters on offense. Now, they lost huge players in some of the big linemen that they've had. Resigno at the quarterback spot, a stud running back in Davenport. But this was the number 1 offense in points scored, and they're returning a lot of skill guys. 3 returning starting offensive linemen as well. Defensively, also 7 starters returning. So again, a lot of experience coming back. And there's without question, when we talk about the coaching staff, since they've taken over from the previous regime, they have won a lot of games. They've also made 2 section titles the last 3 years, which is it's double than what they did the previous 10 years. So there's no question that they have made the Arlington program a constant contender. The question is, Mars, can they take the next step? A couple of these losses in the playoffs have been big because defensively, they've given up a lot of points in some of these big games, and it hurt them in the section title game, hurt them in the previous year when they lost to Mamaroneck. They gave up like 56 points. So again, defense to me over the next step is going to be so big. They're returning 7 starters. We know offensively, they've shown to be pretty potent over the last few years. A couple players to watch, Mars, keep an eye on. A couple of Frank's finest we saw. Make sure if you haven't watched it, go watch it. Cartier Joshua, a stud wide receiver. Sean Allen anchoring that offensive line with Mike Lucido. Those are going to be really important. Jaden Tuttle on the defensive back, but he's also a wide receiver who can make plays. They have a bunch of skill guys, but a couple other things, a big tight end. Liam Overton, 6'2", 230-pound tight end, Mars, is another guy where Arlington gets these big tight ends as like an extension of that offensive line. And then you have Xavier Real Muto on defense is really going to have to lead the way for Arlington. Mars, the next team now we're going to talk is the section champs. right? And again, there's no specific order here. We're trying to make it alphabetical. So the next one's up is Carmel, and coached by Coach Connolly. And in his first official season as head coach, Coach K had to step down early last season when Coach Dono took over. But Coach Connolly is in at the head man spot. This is a team that has won 3 straight section title games. I went on Kevin Devaney's show and talked about Carmel and how wild of a run, Mars, that they've had the last couple of years. After the COVID year, their team was stacked. It was probably the most talented team that Carmel had in the last 20 plus years. They roll into a section title and into the state finals. So they were absolutely dominant. Then the next year, Mars, our father goes over there as defensive coordinator. They lost a boatload of seniors. And I remember talk around the league is, Carmel's probably going to be good, but they're probably going to take a step back. They go win a section title. They go undefeated during the season, win a section title. Again, a close game versus Mamaroneck was a really good team, but they still won. Then, come into this year, even more seniors left from that state title team. It's like Carmel's definitely going to take a step back. Coach K had to step down. They got beat up by Arlington, and yet, Mars, they win again. They make the run and win. And so to disregard Carmel is going to be a fool's errand. They're 34-3 in the last 3 years, right? So what happens this year? Granted, I think they should be a favorite. They got to replace a lot of guys, right? 2 of 11 starters returning on offense, Mars. None on the offensive line, right? And Carmel, what has really dominated the last couple of years has been up front. Now, good news is defensively, 4 starters coming back. So there's definitely more experience on the defensive side and some guys to keep on. Teddy Galbraith at the tight end spot. He really sparked on tape. He's a Frank's finest, 6'4", 215 pounds. Dwayne Hibbert at the defensive end, really fast off the edge. Tamba Casal. Keep an eye on this young man. We got to experience him a little bit as a sophomore when I was over there. But this is a young man who made some plays on the defensive side last year as a junior at the linebacker spot, defensive end spot. They move him around. So he's another talented guy in the defense that you can see make a lot of plays. Brian McGorry at the quarterback spot. People have raved about this young man last offseason. That he has so much potential, so he takes over for the veteran quarterback that graduated. And then up front, you got King Mercer, Alton Shala, King Mercer on the defensive side, but now moving to the offensive side as well on that O-line. He's going to be so important up front to reestablish this offense. And then obviously the stud is Tristan Worley, right? This young man running the football, arguably the best running back in the section, Mars. He runs with power. He can get to that second level and burst, create these big chunk plays, and also became a real nasty returner. So Mars, those are probably the 2 big guns they call the favorites. We saw number 1, number 2 on the polls. Who do you want to talk about? What has stood out to you in our evaluation in the offseason?
Well, I feel like what's kind of funny about us picking is almost alphabetical. The fact that these 2 teams are the most consistent rivalry that we see in AA right now. And obviously for Arlington, the biggest thing is you got to get past that next step, right? I mean, Arlington the last 5 years, and you said it, 33-15 in the last 5 years, and previously I think the previous regime was roughly 500, right? And I feel like in the previous 5 years, and before that, and so I feel like yes, Arlington has improved to be that powerhouse team that they should be, right? And so now the question is, can they get past the next point? And the fact they have all these returning players is obviously going to help them in that feat and try to get to that next level. And I kind of look at them at Carmel and say, Carmel's always been that team with a target on their back, but they've avoided being hunted, right? They have avoided that at every point, whether it was last year where a lot of people said that Carmel would fall off. They didn't, right? And almost the same kind of talk is happening again. Are they going to fall off? Carmel has shown that they have been very consistent. They've been very tough. And you have a lot of guys coming back with that are top level players. Not saying that like you have a lot of returners, but a lot of the returners coming back are players that are really, really good. Like Tristan Waterloo is a fantastic player that changed the game in the section final. That was single-handedly almost felt like that he was dominating. But then you have Teddy Galbraith, who is also going to be a really big player for Carmel as well. And it just feels like Carmel has a lot going for them. Arlington, on the other hand, they do too. But it's almost like you have to reach the mountaintop now. You've gotten to the playoffs. You've gotten to the section finals. Got to win it. Right? That's kind of the big thing for me.
Yeah, let's keep going. And the next team we talk about has been a staple in AA, and that's John Jay Fishkill, coached by Coach Cancelleri the last couple of seasons. They were 7-3, and they lost to Arlington in the semis. Another team over the last 5 years, 26-14, right? A lot of wins churned up. but they're replacing a boatload of guys. They were a senior-heavy team, 2 of 11 starters on the offense, Morris, and both those guys on the offensive line. Obviously, they have to replace a great quarterback in Feliciano, so that's always difficult. And defensively, 2 starters coming back. So a lot of newcomers coming in. Good thing is, East Fishkill has had a strong JV. They've had some young guys on that team. Let's see if they can step up. A couple players to keep an eye on. A couple of the Frank's finest that we've talked about previously, and Cruz Calcagni at the safety spot and the running back spot that coaches really raved has gotten stronger this year. Vinny Angioletti, slot receiver, was a really big target for them out of that slot on motions, right, on some of these quick outs, some of those deep concepts. He was a big-time player, also plays outside linebacker. And then a couple other guys. Nathan Johnson, you keep in mind, he was a freshman on varsity last year, Mark, super fast. This is a very fast, vertically beat you. And if they can get the quarterback position under, in the right direction, there are some skill guys who can make plays, but coach really raved about their tight ends. Perricone, Schukel, strong guys, physical blockers, and can also be targets at the wide receiver spot. The question is what's going to happen at quarterback. Matt Patridge, the senior, he understands the system well. He's the point guard on the basketball team. Coach really liked the work he put in this offseason, so I'm interested to see what East Fishkill does. Next up, Mars, probably one of my big contenders this year, and that's Mamaroneck. Coached by Coach Vitti, 6-3 last year. They lost to Suffern in the quarterfinals. The last couple of seasons, Mars, they're 21-7, right? 2 years ago, they were in the section final game that lost to Carmel. But they're bringing back a lot of experience. I mean, offensively, they were 4th in AA in points scored, and they're returning 7 starters, 4 on the offensive line. Now, they have to replace their quarterback. They have to replace a running back who were big parts in this offense. Defensively, they're also returning 7 starters. So this is, again, a lot of veterans coming back here for a team that played pretty damn well last year. So a couple guys to keep an eye on. Harlan Glassman, the offensive lineman. He is a very versatile lineman, 3-year starter for them, can play multiple positions. Micah Berry-Thous, the running back and linebacker, keep an eye on him. He could be someone who is not talked about a lot. He's 6'1", 225 pounds. He was a stud at the linebacker spot, very physical, also going to be playing some running back, so it's going to be huge for them. On the quarterback spot, someone who's trying to replace that quarterback and become a star is Kieran Jacobson. Coach really raved about this young man, 6'2", 215 pounds, has the physical tools there. Excited to see what he can do in this offense. Quarterback is going to be so important for them. But a couple other guys who can really stand out. I mentioned Jack Davidson, the wide receiver. He's a Frank's finest, really explosive receiver, really came onto the scene for this offense last year. And then again, you have Henry Norman at the defensive end tight end spot, 6'4", 240 pounds. So you can see some of these guys, keep an eye on Henry Bone, Matt Murphy, veteran guys who got a lot of time last year, and they're coming back. Mamaroneck could be a real contender, Mars. Keep an eye on them. Mars, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say Mamaroneck is probably the team that I'm probably the most excited for, because I feel like since they played against Carmel in the section finals, that was like one of their best teams I probably have ever seen at Mamaroneck. And, that was like, it was a very good game. It was a battle all the way to the end. And now this is kind of that moment where Mamaroneck has a very, very loaded squad of guys coming back. And when you have a line, 4 of your 5-year starters are returning, that's a very good sign. Usually, especially in Section 1, where, skill players are really important, but the offensive line, like every program, if you can get those guys having a lot of veteran experience, a lot of guys who have played there before and have great showings, I mean, you're going to have a solid run game. And I feel like in Section 1, that's the most important thing. So having 4 of the 5 starters coming back, that is a big deal. And granted, you're not having a quarterback returning. It's you have to find that new mesh. But at the same time, I feel like you're still in a good spot. The offensive line giving you consistency, like that's something that not a lot of people are really thinking about. But I feel like Mamaroneck has a chance to really go far in this year. So I'm looking forward to seeing it.
Yeah, let's keep going, Mars. Next up is Rochelle. Coached by Coach Ray Rett. Last year, they did make the playoffs. They lost to Carmel in quarterfinals, ended the season as 4-6. So they lost the last 2 games that put them under 500. And again, the last 5 years, Mars, Rochelle, 35-13. but 10 of those 13 losses are the last 2 years, right? So again, it's New Rochelle trying to get back to what they've always been, which is, we known for feels like generations now that they were a dominant force, and they definitely want to try to get back to that. Obviously, they deal with a lot of things going around New Rochelle, so there's definitely understanding there. They have a lot of guys they got to replace as well. Again, they're returning 3 out of 11 starters on offense, 1 on the offensive line. Have to replace their quarterback. Defensively, 4 starters returning on defense, so a little bit more experience on the defensive side, and a couple guys definitely to keep an eye on. The first one is Christian Rowe, a defensive lineman, offensive lineman. He's a Frank's finest. He was to me, huge man. This guy's 6 feet, 300 pounds, Mars, but he has a really quick first step. He has a nice little 5-yard burst, and it really catches offensive linemen off guard. He causes a lot of penetration. To me, I think he is their best player, but a couple other guys to keep it on. Randy Morales, he's a junior, great work ethic, huge part of the offense at the running back spot. Andre Morales, linebacker, he's a very active player, also plays on that offensive line. And someone that Coach talked about that could really pop as the season goes along is their quarterback, Tajir Vernon. This young man is a senior, supremely athletic, and I'm interested to see, again, how this New Rochelle offense kind of evolves. The offensive line is going to be another thing. What kept New Rochelle dominant for years is their ability to dominate up front. And so I'm interested to see how they put that offensive and defensive line together. Next up, North Rockland, coached by Coach Hickey. 7-3 last year, Mark. They did miss the playoffs. Obviously, it did not end the way they wanted to, but still, again, 7 wins. They're 25-19 over the last 5 years. The last 3 years, they are, 17-12. Yeah, so 17-12. And this is a team that also has some serious talent coming back. Now, offensively, 4 starters coming back, and another big thing, I keep here repeating it, Mars, 1 offensive lineman coming back, right? So, again, a lot of these teams are trying to figure out their offensive lines going into this season. They also are looking for a new quarterback, right? So that's going to be the tough part, but what's good, defensively, Mars, 6 starters coming back, and this was a defense that was 5th in points allowed last season. So there's definitely some experience there. Probably the best secondary, I think, in the entire league or section, if I'm being honest with you. And it starts, again, that's the guys I want to bring up. Javon Lawrence at the cornerback spot, committed to Syracuse, has elite physical attributes. 3-year player for North Rockland. He's tall, he's long, he can run with some of these explosive wide receivers. King St. Fleur, Mars, is another guy really stood out to me on tape at the safety spot. He's a guy you can play in the box, he can play as a high safety, and then Jaquan Johnson is a real physical corner on the outside. You get 3 out of the 4 in the secondary, you're looking pretty good, especially against teams that really want to try to throw the ball. So those are big, but they're not alone. I mean, Tyler Prisco, he was hurt last year, a very talented linebacker. They're really excited to have him back. But the big question I have is on that offensive and defensive line. Cam Fountain, Billy Thomas, Jack Smith, Lucas Fargas. These are some of the names that this team really is relying on. And if North Rockland's going to make a run, it's going to be with those guys really taking shape up front.
Yeah, and I feel like the team I'm really interested in the storyline with them is New Rochelle. And as much as everyone has always kind of said, well, New Rochelle hasn't been in the same, I guess, dominant nature that they've been in the previous, decade, but they've been a playoff team, right? And they've always been a consistent playoff team, and whether it was them losing in the quarterfinals and last year, 2021, losing in the semis, they've been winning, and it's just they haven't been to the same level as they were back when we were playing in Section 1. So I think that I think one thing that Coach Rhett really emphasized in discussions with you in the interview was about this new kind of feeling that you see in the playoffs, or that they have more of a motivation to kind of bring everyone together to kind of push for bringing back that mentality that New Rochelle had for such a long time of, yes, they are, New Rochelle should have that mantra that they have always been a very good program. It's now just about taking ownership of yourself and of your teammates and working together. And I feel like that is the first step to really set the momentum back in the direction of what New Rochelle always was. And obviously you're going to have some great players, that are really going to be driving for that. But the idea is that obviously it's going to be tough. You have one offensive lineman returning. You really need to find that new era of guys that can move bodies around. And like you said, the speed that New Rochelle always had when it comes hitting to the outside and the consistency of the Hogs up front being able to just move people, right? And I feel like they have to get back into the basics. I feel like in Rochelle, when they were just doing their downhill running, they were dominant. And the question is going to be, can they get back to that same old New Rochelle of the past?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk next, Scarsdale. And this is a team 5-4. They lost to Jay Fishkill in the quarterfinals. And offensively, they're returning 4 of the 11 starters, 2 on that offensive line. Now, they did have their quarterback rotating at times last season, so they do get a bit of a veteran quarterback experience back, which is important. Defensively, this was a really strong defense last year, number 2 in points allowed in AA. And they have 4 starters coming back. Now, a couple guys to watch. One of my favorite guys in the section is Ryan Gilligan, fullback and linebacker, really stud football player. Again, at the fullback, he started as an offensive lineman, Mars, and then transitioned eventually into the fullback role. Had a strong year, but to me, at the linebacker spot, he was tremendous. And to me, he's one of probably the best linebackers in the class. Michael Vibert is another one. Wide receiver, safety, made plays on both sides of the football. Really strong wide receiver. And this is someone who's going to be such an important two-way player for them. Colin Brennan is another at the linebacker spot. Probably going to get a bigger role running the football. At the linebacker spot, he was a nice duo for Ryan with them. And they had this really good tandem at the linebacker spot and made a lot of plays. And finally, Alex Krupkin. Keep an eye on him. He's a junior. Coach really raved about him in my interview as well. Running back and the safety spot. And then to wrap off this kind of power league, this first league, another team that's very interesting to me is Suffern. Coached by Coach Muller over the last couple of years. They were 5-4 last year. They lost to Carmel in the semifinals. And the last 5 years, 28-21. So pretty good win total. They have, 16-11 the last 3 years. So again, pretty strong performance the last couple of years. Offensively, they have 6 starters returning, 2 on the offensive line. They're also one of the only 2 teams, Mars, in the league returning their quarterback, right? So again, we talked about a lot of teams are going to be replacing their quarterback, but Suffern is bringing back their veteran quarterback in Palumbo. Defensively, this was a really strong defense. They're returning 4 starters on the defensive end. They were number 3 in points allowed last season, and a couple guys really to keep an eye on. Jeff Joseph. We talked about Tristan Werlew, probably the best running back in the section, understandably. But this guy is not that far behind. He's a tall, athletic basketball player. He's a guy who can catch out of the backfield, run. He's got these long glides who can pull away from people. Keep an eye on this young man. Mason Palumbo at the quarterback spot now, a couple years into the system, looking to make that next step forward is going to be huge for him. And the guy who I really like, two-way, he's an offensive lineman, defensive lineman, Shane Stallcup, Mars. This young man is I think he's like 6'4". He's long, he's lean. He's not like a huge bulky guy, but he delivers some serious power blocking at the tackle spot. Had to be thrust into the offensive line spot, and he made it work. So this is somebody who's going to be so important on both sides of the football. Finnegan Mitchell, defensive back, he made so many plays at the back end on that defense, but also at the wide receiver spot is going to be huge for the skill position for this team.
Yeah, and I feel like when I'm looking at Suffern, it is a very, very unique story for them because of the fact that you obviously are not returning back most of your offensive line. Now, 2 of the 5 are coming back, but I feel like a lot of teams are struggling, like you said before, to not having back the quarterback is a big issue. You're having a guy that has most teams that we're talking about have a brand new quarterback stepping in as this now starter, but Mason Palumbo is now that only one of the few veterans returning, right? But I feel like on top of that, Suffern having a Jeff Joseph is a groundbreaking thing for a team to have a top tier running back to be that anchor unit, right? The guy that you can rely on in these tough scenarios. So I feel like Suffern has the ability to make some noise this year, especially with the fact you have some star players returning. The question is going to be about these new starters stepping into the offensive line and whether they can really open up those lanes. Because if they have a good offensive line up front, then the run game is really going to be set in stone. Right? I feel like that's a pretty good sign.
Yeah. Let's go to the other league now. This is the B League in Section 1AA. I don't know if they have an official name, but I call it League B. But let's start off with the merger, Mars. The East Ramapo merger between what's Ramapo High School and Spring Valley High School. coached by Coach Bullock, who was the head coach of Ramapo, and also bringing in the defensive coordinator, which is Andrew Delva, who was the head coach of Spring Valley. So you're bringing in a coaching staff, and there's multiple assistants that have experience with both schools, and I think that's really important right off the bat. And they're bringing back a boatload of starters. Offensively, 7 of 11 starters between the two teams coming back from Spring Valley, 5 of 11 from Ramapo. All 5 linemen spots are returning for them, combining the two teams, including their quarterback. So, again, a lot of you're bringing in a pool of talent from both schools, and you're seeing a lot of these starters coming on the offensive end and defensive end. 6 out of 11 starters coming. So, again, they're bringing back some experience, a very interesting team to me. Big question mark is going to be at the quarterback spot. Coach talked about it. They want to get a team that's going to be a manager out there, and because they have all these skill guys, they just want somebody who's going to right the ship, control the ship, right? And then depth at the inside linebacker spot, because they lost some of the guys there. But guys to keep an eye on, Mars. Anthony Mack is someone that I talked about previously. He's a Frank's Finest kid. Line up at D-tackle, D-end, linebacker. Just a really versatile defensive player. Going to be playing on the offensive line as well, but he's always around the football. Jonathan Meade at the quarterback spot is someone that, again, we talked about. It's going to be so important for this team if they want to take that step forward. They're going to need strong play at the quarterback spot, and a couple other guys. Eli Pierre at the linebacker spot. Smaller guy, though, but super aggressive, Mars. Another guy with a really nice nose for the football. Then you have Zion Osborne, Eric Griffin at the wide receivers. So they've got like a bunch of skill guys. This is going to be a really interesting thing. I think they're going to be one of the sleepers in the other league. Again, you have to get in the top 2 to make the playoffs. This one is set that it could be one of them. So definitely keep an eye on them. Next up, Mount Vernon. This is another interesting team, right? They went 3-6 last year. They didn't make the playoffs. The year before, they did make the playoffs. Offensively, and we didn't get a chance to speak to coach this time, this offseason, but I will say this. Offensively, I think they were a little bit ahead. They were middle of the pack offensively. They are bringing back a couple offensive linemen. They're bringing back their running back. The quarterback spot, I think the initial quarterback moved to wide receiver. So interested to see what goes on at the quarterback spot there. The problem was defensively, right? 13 out of 14 in points allowed. So defense was definitely an issue for them that they have to get better at. But a couple names to keep an eye on. Edward Abayo, the defensive end. This guy is super active. I think he lines up at the DN. He's going to be on the offensive line. This guy, he's big. He's physical. He's a Frank's Finest defensive lineman, and probably one of the kids that really popped off tape when I watched Mount Vernon last year. But Dwight Finley, another guy at the wide receiver spot. Finley got work at the quarterback spot. Also punter, a really strong punter, but tall, long athlete. Kensai Francois on the offensive line, another big, strong kid. And one of my favorites to watch, Deshaun Terry, the running back spot. Shorter guy, but super explosive. Catch the ball out of the backfield. He really is a lightning rod at the running back spot for this team.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really excited for this merger between East Ramapo and Ramapo, because Spring Valley and Ramapo, because of the fact that me and you were Jets and Giants fans, and I always say to you all the time, imagine if the Jets had and Eli Manning for all those years. You had a great defense. What would happen? Merge the teams together, and we would be a Super Bowl contender every year. And it's kind of like that feeling where now you have a merger between these two programs, and now you can kind of pick and mix and match a lot of these athletes and players and say, hey, now we have a combination where you can really make some noise. And I feel like that's an interesting feeling to have, where you have a lot of these now have a lot of returning starters between both programs. You have obviously some really big skill players, like obviously like guys like Jonathan Meade, Eli Pierre are going to be big players to watch out for. And like you said before, Anthony Mack is a guy that has the caliber of being a top player in the league. Yeah. And he's now, we have the staff and guys who are all have experience. And now on one program, you have a chance to make some noise. And like you said, could they take one of those top 2 spots to make the playoffs? I can see it happen.
Yeah. One of them, Mars, on this next team is Ossining. Coached by Coach McRae, they were 5-5. They made the playoffs for the first time in 3 years. They did lose to Arlington in the quarterfinals. And offensively, this was the offense that was 5th in points scored. They did lose their stud running back, but they are returning 6 starters, 3 on the offensive line. So trying to figure out the quarterback spot, trying to figure out the running back spot. But how about defensively? They're returning 9 starters, Mars. So a lot of experience on the defensive side of the ball. Coach talked about, again, experience at the quarterback position is going to be probably one of their bigger question marks. But I tell you what, they have some really interesting guys coming back, and they want to be very aggressive on the defensive side. When I spoke to Coach, and Aiden Moore is a guy to keep an eye on. He is a stud defensive player, one of the best pass rushers in Section 1, the entirety of it. He has a really good burst and bend off the edge, and he got stronger. So this is a guy now who can bring in some bull rushing mechanics or some power into his pass rushing. And this is one of the more dynamic defense players. Anyone who plays Ossining has to know where Aiden Moore is on the field at all time. A couple other guys, Daniel Schlott, Mars, running back, linebacker. He's a returning all-section player for them, another very active defensive player, always around the football. Matt Cassione, offensive lineman and linebacker, all-section wrestler, Mars, so a guy who definitely knows about leverage. And Tommy McCormick, he's a guy who was safety last year, pretty strong safety, but he also is going to be slotted in at the quarterback spot. So going to be so important for him. Ossining, I thought, ran the ball very well last year, Mars, but really struggled in the passing game, trying to get a consistent pass attack. Let's see if Tommy McCormick could be that answer for them.
Yeah, I feel like Ossining is really interesting to me. I feel like they are a squad that can really make some noise too. And like you said, they could steal one of those second spots because they have all these top tier athletes, and they're the fact that they have several guys who are all section players, and whether it was in wrestling or football, I mean, you have guys coming back and you have some momentum. Like, I feel like that's something that Ossining really needs.
Yeah. Next up is RC Ketchum, coached by Coach Hogan, who's been there since 2015 now, so quite a long time. Last season they went 2-7. It was a struggle. They didn't make the playoffs, and again, they're really trying to turn things around. They haven't had more than 3 wins since 2019, right? So, they're really trying to turn things around. And when I spoke with Coach, you are getting some players back, so that's going to be really important. Offensively, 5'11" starters returning, including their quarterback, which is huge. 2 guys, on the offensive line. But Coach knows they need to score more points. They were 13th in points scored last season out of 14 teams. So that was a big issue that they had, and they're trying to fix that going into this year. Now, defensively, they do bring back 5 starters defensively. I thought defense was a little bit stronger for that unit. They do want to prevent giving up some bigger plays like they did last time, but a couple players to watch. A guy that, again, wasn't a Frank's finest, but he was really close, and that is defensive end and offensive lineman Raheem Abdullah. This is another very active football player. I was super, super impressed what I saw on tape with his effort and his energy. That's something that, again, translates. When you have somebody who is physical, he's not a huge guy, but he can really get after it, and he brings that energy. To me, those are the guys I really enjoy watching. But another guy, big offensive lineman and nose tackle, Chris Shetter. This is a guy who the tools are there. Like, he is a college-built offensive lineman. He's big, he's physical, he can down block, drive block. So those are going to be huge. Again, it's going to be really, really important. Fitzsimons, a quarterback, is also, he took a beating last year, right? And so you want to see him if he can help be the veteran presence coming back, improving on some of his technique work. He can be someone who can make big plays for them. And you got Dylan Fay at the running back spot, Giselle Brooks. So you're going to see a couple different kids coming back. Keep an eye on RCK. This is a team that had 2 wins last year. I could see them getting a couple more wins, especially in this B League. I think they'll be in the middle of that pack in there, so it's going to be interesting there. One more before Marcel, I'll pass it on to you, and that is White Plains, coached by Coach Lindbergh. Really struggled last year. They were 1-7. They did not make the playoffs. But I tell you what, offensively is where they were last in the league on offense in points scored in the regular season. Obviously, that's going to be a point of emphasis. Good news is they're bringing back a couple guys that can really spark things, and that is Nick Sexton, the running back. I mean, this guy is explosive. He had over 1,000 total yards of offense, 700 yards rushing, 300 yards receiving. He's a returner. I think he scored a returning touchdown. This is a guy who's physically built, and he just exudes energy and athleticism. I mentioned this story on Kevin Devaney's show, but I saw him bench 275 Mars as a personal best, get right up, and then do a standing backflip right after he benched in the gym. So again, this guy, he's a spark plug, and if they're going to turn things around offensively, it's going to be on his back. Noah Lee is another guy to keep an eye on for White Plains. Defensively, they were a little bit better defensively. They were 12th in points allowed, but again, a lot of things that they need to work on for White Plains to turn this thing around.
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, there's a lot of question marks for White Plains for me, but I feel like, I mean, you have athletes and you have kind of a spark to say we need to right the ship, we need to get back into the groove. And White Plains is always a competitive squad, and I feel like the last few years they've had some struggles for sure. But when you have guys like Nick Sexton that can really be a spark plug for this team, for this offense and defense, I feel like that gives opportunity. And I feel like that's where White Plains really needs to bank on, is more of those guys stepping up and really just paving the way for really a bounce back. Because I feel like playing in this League B does help a lot, because now it's about getting the top two, right? And you're definitely going to get a lot more competition, and you know, I feel like it's going to really be drawn out to see whether or not who is going to step up and take those top two spots.
Yeah, no, I agree. Now let's wrap it up with the Yonkers teams, and let's start with Yonkers Brave and Coach Hogue, Doug Hogue, is for in his first year, and again, didn't get to speak to Coach this offseason, unfortunately, but you know, it's been a struggle for Yonkers Brave. They haven't had a win the last 3 years. So they went 0-9 last season. They didn't make the playoffs. They were 12th in points scored last season. Now they do return a couple guys at the skill spot. Kiba Kasey, he's an athlete. He moves them around the field, can make plays for you. Michael Barnes is running back and linebacker. Damari Dixon is a junior. He's at the wide receiver and cornerback spot. And then defensively, that's where I think things really struggled. They were last in the league in points allowed. So that definitely is something that's going to be a point of emphasis. They have to be better defensively. And a guy who can help that is Jaden Rush at the linebacker spot, who's, again, he started defensive line, moved to linebacker, another guy who can make a lot of plays for this team. Let's move on to now the Yonkers Force. So Yonkers Force, coached by Coach Benise in his first year, and I apologize, Coach, if I say your name incorrectly. They went 3-7 last year. They did not make the playoffs. Now, offensively, I thought the offense was pretty strong. They were 7 out of 14 in points scored, and they're returning 5 starters, 2 on the offensive line, and their quarterback, and probably one of the most dynamic quarterbacks in Section 1 AA. So that's obviously a huge spark for them. Now, defensively, they do need to get a little. They were 11th out of 14 in points allowed. 5 out of the 11 starters are returning, which is, you know, again, great. But when I spoke to Coach about defensively, you know, they're adapting new systems. So again, when you got a new system in here, you want to make sure that you don't want to make it too complicated, right? Because there's a lot to learn in one off season. So it's probably going to be a work in progress as the season goes along. So interested to see how the defense comes together. But a couple players to watch. I mentioned their quarterback, Nazir Fields. He was our Frank's finest quarterback. He's an explosive quarterback. This is a guy who's dual threat. He rushed for over 1,000 yards, super deadly in the red zone. But he's not alone. They got a guy, Joshua Tessmark, at the wide receiver spot. Fast, explosive, agile, a skilled route runner. And then probably a couple linemen to keep an eye on. Joseph Williams. This is going to be so important. As you have a stud quarterback, you have a skilled guy out there who can make plays for you. You're going to have to pass protect, right? You're going to have to be strong up front. And Joseph Williams is probably one of them. 6'2", 275 pounds. He was a really strong interior offensive lineman for them. Going to have to lead the way for that offensive line as an entire group. Mars, what are your thoughts on the Yonkers teams?
Yeah, I feel like both Yonkers squads, I feel like will benefit more playing in League B. I feel like they'll definitely have more of I feel like they have a chance to kind of at least be more in the middle, right? If they can kind of rely on their skilled athletes to kind of push them forward. I feel like Yonkers Force might have a little bit of an advantage. I'm sure that I'm going to get some hate for saying that, but I feel like Nazir Fields is definitely a playmaker, and I feel like he kind of gives them kind of that boost of energy. And there's a lot of guys that can really ride high with him leading the way, and at least gives Yonkers Force a little bit more of a kind of a balanced attack. Right? You could do a lot of different things with this squad of athletes, but I feel like Nazir Fields really does bring out a more dynamic offense. He's an athlete. He can do a lot of different things. So I feel like he's going to be really explosive this year, and I feel like Yonkers Force might have more advantage, but I feel like both Yonkers squads will be more in the middle of the pack. I mean, I could be wrong, but I feel like they might have more of a push to gain, at least get higher than they were last year.
Yeah, and Nazir, an interesting thing that Coach brought up. He's a younger brother of Tyquell Fields, who was Stony Brook quarterback from Stepinac. So interesting little tidbit there. But with that said, guys, I know a nice big long video. This is our Section 1AA preview show. We wanted to talk about each team and some players from all of them, kind of give our thoughts on what this league is going to look like. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. And also, guys, before we check out, consider joining our Patreon. It really is a boost to our group. It gives us some little extra support. We also give some additional perks from whether we're talking about weekly summaries, rankings, and stuff like that. So definitely check it out, and we appreciate all our members as always. With that, Mars, we are going to sign off here. We will see you guys very soon. The games are right around the corner, and we'll catch you guys next time.